Okay. Okay, let's get started. Hello, everyone. I am Albert, CEO of Bitcoin Startup Lab. Welcome to the Who's Who and the Founder's Journey into Bitcoin interview series. The reason why we've come together as a community to do this is to celebrate innovation and significant achievements on Bitcoin so that we reinforce and grow the innovation culture on Bitcoin. Significant achievements on Bitcoin are things that were done for the very first time or setting new records to push forward the innovation frontier of Bitcoin. This show is brought to you by the Bitcoin Startup Lab, a top pre-accelerator in the Bitcoin ecosystem. BTC Inc., parent company of Bitcoin Magazine, the top media on Bitcoin, and CryptoSlate, a crypto-agnostic media platform that brings the latest happenings on Bitcoin to the rest of the crypto world. And a big thank you, of course, to our teams and all the guest speakers that have come together to make this show possible and accelerate the advent of the Bitcoin economy. Today, we're joined by our special guest speaker, Jason Fong, founder of Sora Ventures, who became the most prolific investor in Bitcoin ecosystem in 2023, H1. Okay, and they are also the lead investor for the Bitcoin Startup Lab. So let's get started. Hi, Jason. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you have a really interesting story for the founder's journey into Bitcoin. So we're all very excited to hear about your origin story. So thank you so much for being willing to share that story. We believe that this is going to help inspire more people to want to innovate on Bitcoin. So with that said, let's start when you're before a founder, right? I heard you at Fambusu Capital, the VC that Vitalik, founder of Ethereum, used to also work at, right? And before that, you're at Draper U. Before that, but before we get into all that, I'm curious what you're doing before even that. Right? Can you start from the top there? What were you doing before your career there?
Yeah. So, well, thanks again for having me. I do appreciate for organizing this. Obviously, the story of Sora Ventures it goes back, more than 6 years ago. And obviously, I've had ups and downs in the market, but ultimately, it kind of boils down to the principles and kind of like the initial path, which is I've started going into the startup space at a relatively young age. So I started my startup experience during my junior year in college, and I was extremely fascinated by the education space, and so the edtech at that time was just ended. The way for investing in the edtech just ended, but the experience taught me one thing, which it got me into coding. So I was basically doing iOS development full stack back then, and this continued on even after my college career ended, where I was still actively coding. And most of the time people get into blockchain because of either they have an engineering background or they're fascinated, or they have some form of computer science background. So because of I knew about Bitcoin as early as 2013, 2012, but I was more fascinated by the technology surrounding Bitcoin. And I didn't really actually pick up or understood some of the meaning behind how blockchain worked until I really got myself into coding. And I think that really helps. I mean, if you remember kind of like the early days, I mean, it was even very difficult to learn about what blockchain on Google. And I mean, there's only a handful of open documents about Bitcoin. There was a course on Princeton that was on YouTube. There's obviously the white papers and a handful of articles and very, very limited amount of information that kind of like fully describe what blockchain is and what's the kind of the use case of blockchain in the real world. Most of the the document that we could probably find online at that time was revolving around Bitcoin. And so, so naturally, having that background in tech helped a lot in understanding what blockchain was, especially the visually understanding what blockchain, how it moves, and what are some of the behavior that's unique to its properties. And those are super incredible, useful after getting myself involved with coding. And so that's basically what I did before I moved to California, which I did take a program in Draper U, which ultimately led to having more exposure and understanding blockchain through conferences, which end up meeting my boss at Fimbushi Capital at that time at the conference.
Thanks for that overview. Let's there's a few things I'm curious about you, especially about your first entrepreneurial experience when you're junior year. You say you learned how to code because of your interest in the education industry. So that means that what were you studying though, if you weren't?
Yep. So I was doing I have a very interesting background, which is I didn't actually study computer science. I self-taught. I went through online courses, and if most people like who did startup in the early days went through kind of the very stereotypical startup experience, which is you do everything yourself, and the investors actually want you to do everything yourself. And so one of the basic was the fundamental principle was like you don't, as a CEO, you should actually know like how to code as well, because if your product is around coding, it's about building, you should understand how to code. And so this is how I got into coding, which encouraged myself to wake up at 5, start coding all the way from 8 until 12 midnight. I did that for basically several months. After college, I'm Canadian, so after college I went back to Toronto, where I would spend a lot of my time going to University of Waterloo, which is the school that Vitalik graduated from, or he dropped out from. And there's a lot of really, really good talented programs, and so for that reason there's a lot of developers or students who are learning to become how to become a programmer or developer at University of Waterloo. And I'll just basically sleep at their place and learn how to code while they're like our mentor, my mentor, and kind of helping me with a lot of the early questions or problem solve. It was a very difficult learning experience because a lot of the stuff was outdated. And so it was helpful to have someone who knew how to code beside me. But ultimately I went through that experience about 4 months, and that taught me a lot. And then from there it gradually became obvious that coding is one of those skills that once you hit a certain level, you can actually basically the rest of the stuff can be self-taught.
Wow, that's a big breakthrough. So what were you studying as your major?
Oh, yes, I did finance and economics at a business school called Bentley University. Generally in the American schools, there's liberal arts and then business college. And I focused on the business side, and I had a minor in business law. The reason why I got into education was, I've had a lot of passion for volunteering and giving back. So I graduated from high school, with the most volunteering hours. So, this actually kind of goes back to what I'm doing today, which is to some extent, I'm sharing my experience. I'm educating a lot of people. But it obviously didn't start from my career today. It started with kind of like my passion for volunteering back in high school. And then in August, I graduated in high school with by far the most volunteering hours. And I won every single award that had to do with volunteering leadership. So I knew I had a passion for giving back to society and for just being generally a giver. And that it really expanded when I wanted to do more in education. And so I wanted to build basically an Uber for tutoring, where you could help a lot of students answer questions, a lot of the PSETs, and this was mostly targeting the college questions. If you remember, back in the days, college was more about PSETs. You can have all these questions that maybe 5 or 6 that goes home, but generally they took an hour to do. And so we target a lot of that and some of the questions were as higher as 100 USD. But then the problem was we realized that that even education is one of those things that initially you might want to bring value to people who are using it, but that value can also be a negative thing. So we found that a lot of people are using it to cheat. And so they weren't actually learning, they were actually more like cheating. And so that became very, very difficult for us to fundraise in the future. And the narrative was basically the opposite of what we wanted to do. And because it was also very difficult to get funding from EdTech at that time, that the EdTech wave was mostly 2011. When I did it was 2013. So that I've also learned that timing and investment is so important. So kind of goes back to kind of like, I guess, in the later questions, which is why we invest in Bitcoin now. Because at such a young age, I already kind of learned the hard way, which is at the end of the day, it's all about timing.
Yeah, you're right. Thanks for sharing that. You read my mind. I was about to ask you what kind of ed tech product you made, and you answered before I could ask, which is a education Uber, right? So whenever you want
Uber for tutoring.
Uber for tutoring, yeah. So
yeah,
basically, instead of having drivers, you have tutors. So
yes, exactly.
Whenever they could just call a tutor, yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, education is one of those very interesting things that even though the I would say the first wave of education ed tech like yeah, it faded around that time, but I think it's going to come back because it's still fairly backwards. I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, education is really backwards compared to the times and the technology. So I'm sure that we're going to have another chance with the AI boom. But
For sure.
Yeah, let's go back to it's interesting that now that I find out that you got the most hours volunteering in leadership, because speaking of leadership and volunteering or being charitable, a giver, that makes me think about the Bitcoin Olympics hackathon, right? Where Sora Ventures took the lead, right, and put up basically, yeah, it is the largest singular agnostic technology, Bitcoin technology agnostic sponsored prize of the year, and for actually a very long time. But before we get into that, into why I did that for the Bitcoin ecosystem, let's stay on the timeline. And you said you had moved back to Toronto, and then you went to Waterloo, right? And then you're hanging out with other programmers, right? And then, but I also heard that you went to Draper U, right? Draper University. When was that? And did you go there for the education project or something else?
I want to, generally, if you work for Sora, then a lot of people will say that we work too hard. So, but generally, the way we look at it, if we're going somewhere, traveling, I usually want to get as much value as possible. And I knew that I want to, go to the Bay Area to meet with investors, but I want to do more than that. And so, Draper was one of the program that a lot of my friends recommended at that time. I knew it was relatively early. Probably it's generally more for like people who have ideas and probably more early stage. But knowing that, I still went because I found that there's going to be value there, right? And of course, Tim Draper is a very famous investor in the Bay in the U.S. in general, and so I knew about his background, and I thought this would be also a potentially good way to kind of like learn about how investors think. And so yeah, so that's how I kind of like moved. That was kind of the mid 2015 where I decided to move to California.
Mid 2015, you decided to move to California, and you're in Draper U with it was with that education project or with another one?
It was.
Oh.
So at Draper U, the later on I learned that the experiences. At that time, my company, the startup that I was running, was slightly ahead of relative to everyone else because I think a couple of days into the program, they asked only a handful of students to be on stage, and I didn't know about that at all. But my name was called, but then later it was very obvious, like it was basically the three students that had like by far the most experience running startup, And so that's kind of like how I knew it was okay. It's like relative to everyone else, I think, I had a bit more experience than the students, but that also kind of put me in and kind of being more flexible on a lot of my schedule. So even though like Draper had their own like fixed schedule, I had to miss a lot of it because I wanted to learn things that was useful for me as well. So one of them was actually going to a blockchain and learning about blockchain. And then there was a good time because Tim Draper was actually a big fan of Bitcoin at that time. Obviously he's still a big fan of Ethereum and Bitcoin, but at that time he was already kind of pitching to everyone that Bitcoin and blockchain is going to be a future. And I was so fascinated by kind of like the intrinsic value that blockchain brings, right? And it's like the concept of decentralization, right? All that. So I went to kind of like I went to kind of explore the front line myself, which was basically going to a blockchain conference in San Francisco at that time. And that's how I kind of like end up meeting my boss at that time.
Well, so when you say your boss, I think I remember you said it was like the boss of Fenbusi, right?
Yeah, he's a
okay.
founding partner at Fenbushi Capital.
Yeah, okay. So some people might be joining in the middle of this. So everyone, I'm interviewing Jason Fong, founder of Sora Ventures, who became the most prolific investor in Bitcoin for 2023, H1, right? And then we're going through his origin story. So you guys didn't miss much. We're right here getting into like where he started his first startup, right? And got into JPU for it. And I believe you even had revenue, right? For that company. And then you went to a trade show, and you met your future boss from Busu, right? And this is like right before you started Sora Ventures. I'm just helping everyone with the timeline. So what happened there? I'm like, because I Fembus is their headquarters is one of the largest
in Shanghai.
Yeah, in Shanghai. Yeah. So I'm guessing that you moved there. How did you land that position? And if I understand correctly, that's also the VC firm that or investment firm that Vitalik, founder of Ethereum, was working at for a while.
Vitalik was one of the founding partners as well.
Okay.
Along with Boshen, who is the founding partner.
Wow. Okay. So were you there while he was still active?
Yes, the relation that Vitalik had with Fumbushi was Vitalik at the time was still relatively while he was young, and Boshen was like the father figure for Vitalik. In Vitalik's early age, in his early stage when he first started Ethereum, he had a couple of mentors who were all kind of had a father figure, and Boshen was by far the one that gave him the most influence in terms of how Ethereum started in China, how Ethereum later got expanded and got the funding, and it came a lot of that encouragement and funding, initial funding, all came from the LPs of Fumbushi Capital, which is actually
that's interesting. You said Ethereum started in China.
Well, if you look at it, like DEFCON 2 started in Shanghai, was in Shanghai, and I think this is actually quite correlated to some of the upgrades they had, like the Shanghai upgrade. And I think the next upgrade is like has to do with somewhere in Mexico, Cancun or something, right? So it's like I think they're just like having these upgrade based on the conference like location from before, and so Vitalik actually spent the most time of his life in Shanghai. So he spoke fluent Mandarin. If you didn't know, like Vitalik speaks a lot of languages, and he's actually fluent in Mandarin. He can also type in Mandarin. And he self-taught. Like this guy was, obviously was everyone knows him as a genius today, but even that back then he was a genius in many levels. And he self-taught Korean, self-taught Mandarin, and it was really good. It was a really good experience. Like it was the people around blockchain at that time that really got me excited about joining the space. And joining for me, I think a lot of people do feel like crypto is a kind of big mixed party today, where you have a lot of shady people, and then a handful of people who are saying they're building stuff on on Web3 but not really doing stuff. I'm here for a quick buck, and then there's like the lesser people who are here for a long term, right? But actually, when blockchain first started in the early days, in 2014, 2015, the people were there was no tokens, right? And so there was like no speculation other than Bitcoin itself. And so it was actually a lot of really, really smart people. It's just like coming together to build this community. So that
Yeah.
was really attractive.
Thanks for that segue. Much appreciated. That's really interesting facts about Vitalik. The guy is a genius. In a lot of ways, he sort of created Web3, right? And it's good to hear that he has some influence from Boshi, from Boost Capital founder, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just on a side note, it's like a lot of people, I think they get the wrong idea when they say, oh, Web3 is like so many scammers and a lot of people making a quick buck. Well, hey, welcome to the real world. That's the same way in every single industry that I've encountered. It's just that, yes, in the blockchain world, it may happen a lot faster, but make no mistake, in every industry, if it's full blown, it's got scammers and it's got the real people. And part of learning
Sure.
is to figure out
Yeah.
who's who.
Yeah. 100%.
So,
100%. Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, I get it though. If people's like just started like in Web3, then they might think that, but after going to a few different industries, it's the same.
Yeah.
But yeah, so excellent. So you impressed was it Boshi that was at the conference?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Fabushi just started back then. And they needed someone who obviously had a background in Chinese, and obviously fluent English and understand. It makes a lot of sense looking back now because I was actively more trading than doing business stuff like BD stuff. Sorry, coding more than trading. And fundamentally for blockchain, it's important to have a coding background. But I also had a business degree, and I've done startups, and yeah, hustle, and so there's a lot of stuff that were involved in terms of my decision to to join Funabushi Capital. But one of the was kind of your ability to be able to kind of teach yourself how to learn, teach yourself blockchain. I think without the coding experience, I would have never decided to join blockchain. I mean, blockchain at the time was like rocket science for people who didn't kind of like knew, the early days when we got invited to speak at any conference that revolved around blockchain in 2015 and 2016. The topic was never about blockchain. It was about Bitcoin because no one in the audience knew what blockchain was. So you can only talk about Bitcoin, and that's the closest thing you can do. Like we were so careful. I remember back in the days, we were so careful, like the words we use to describe what blockchain is. On literally the topic would be blockchain, but you can only talk about Bitcoin because a lot of people in the audience didn't know about it. So just to show you, it's just like it was very, very difficult to learn about blockchain. I mean, it's now there's plenty of information online, but back in the day there was only a handful. And because at that time that was when blockchain equity just started. Like Bitcoin was always around, right? And then Bitcoin equity started in 2012, 2013, 2014. And then blockchain equity started in 2015, 2016, 2017. And then the ICO followed after that, right? So so I basically had to get into this new space. Basically I had to learn everything myself. So it was obviously a very challenging thing to do, but because the fact that I've taught myself how to code, that made it even more realistic, knowing that now I have that skill set to kind of like move forward and go on the next challenge. And that's eventually one thing led to another, and then running eventually started Sora Ventures.
Yeah, super. So you're at Fumbusu for just a couple of years, if I remember correctly, before you started.
Yes. So I was there. So there's a saying in Asia, which is there's two categories of people who are in the Web3 industry. At that time, it was either you're a speculator, so you're a trader. We call it you're either a crypto or token guy, or you're either a blockchain person, right? And I got in the industry because I was more fascinated by the people who were incredibly smart, like people like Vitalik. And actually, all the founders in the Ethereum Foundation were incredibly smart. And so that was really, really attractive. And then I was more fascinated by the technology than the tokens. Than the trading aspect of because you could trade Dogecoin and Monero, all those early coins, Dash and those guys. relatively early, right? Poloniex. And so so I was mostly on the tech side, and so I was more fascinated by the blockchain side of things, and naturally I would be hanging out more with technical founders and people who are actually exploring use cases around blockchain. And so when ICO started, I decided it was very very obvious that the investment model was blind for yourself and just invest all in every deal because every deal is basically making like 10x on day one. And so I kind of got bored really fast of that kind of like business model, and I actually did end up leaving from Bushi because of that, because I didn't feel like I was adding much value to to the team anymore. And then I actually end up joining one of the biggest portfolio company at Fumbushi, called Playton. And they did something called DLT plus MPC, which today it basically translates to encryption plus blockchain. And this is why we're also a big fan of encryption as an investment thesis at Sora Ventures. But it really started to it really started to like click when I joined Playton, because they were by far the largest company that did anything around enterprise blockchain in Asia at that time. And they were competing with other big companies in the US, like Digital Asset Holding and R3. But some of the people might remember R3, which they're still around to my understanding, but they work with 100 plus banks around the world at one point, and they launched their own private consortium blockchain called Corda. And the people who were involved with this were basically pushing for banks to integrate blockchain. And they did a bunch of fundraising, and their valuation was incredibly high. But that was the time of 2016 when when the narrative around Web3 was blockchain equity, and mostly enterprise. And so when I joined Playton, I immediately fell in love with learning about encryption, learning about the use cases. Before I Fumbushi, I think I knew about like the directions of where the industry was heading, but it's very different working for a fund versus working in a company that explores the details, the tiny things of use cases. And that I was only there for 4 months, because later on it became very obvious that the industry was changing and transitioning. And at that time I was advising a lot of projects on kind of like getting involved with the China market, and this was basically before the ban of ICOs, right? And there's only a handful of people who knew their stuff and was well connected in both sides of the world. And because my role at Fumbushi was the US market, and I was the only one who was basically doing most of the deal sourcing in US. And we had other colleagues that focused on Europe and Asia, but relative to the US, it was minuscule. So US is by far the most important market even today. But because of that, I knew a lot of people, and a lot of people came to China. Back in the days, they could fly to China and fundraise 200 mil in like a week, which is insane. I mean, but that was the time. That was a crazy time. And I had to do both works. But then obviously the work that I was working on with these projects, like a lot of money was going towards tokens and ICOs. A lot more talent were going to ICOs. And because of that, I decided to leave Playton after working there for 4 months, and then started Sora Ventures.
Yeah, that's amazing. So Fumbushi 2 years, then 4 months at the security company, right? Blockchain security company, and then so here's the crux, right? So here we go. This is hopefully you'll inspire some people if you haven't already. This is the reason why we want to do this whole series, Who's Who, and a founder's journey into Bitcoin, is not to have people come up and show off their experience, but rather it's a noble cause, because the more we share our success and our ups and downs, the more people become inspired to build. And today's topic is about getting into Bitcoin, so to become a founder on Bitcoin, right? So, and this is I see this path a lot, right? So people will be entrepreneurs somewhere else first, before they come to Bitcoin. And then, 99% of the time, the first startup is a fail. I even believe that the people who seem to make it the first time, I'm sure they started a business before that they never told anyone about, right? And they failed that. So it's just because the physics of a business is so different than like what we're taught in school, what we see on on the internet, whatever, right? So now we're coming back full circle, right? So junior year, you're an entrepreneur. You graduated and you're an entrepreneur. You went to JPU. You met the founder and mentor, father figure of Vitalik, the founder of Fembos Capital. You worked there for 2 years, and then when is going through the ICO craze, you're like, well, I don't think I can add any more value, right? Basically, you weren't learning that much anymore, right? Because it's sort of like turnkey.
So the company I was in is actually a Shanghai-based company, and just like if you work for SpaceX, you have to be American or you have to go through this heavy security stuff. And the stuff that the company I was working at, they work directly with Chinese exchanges, like traditional exchanges. So this is like non-crypto stuff, with government banks, Chinese banks. And I was like the first foreign employee, and they had like well over 100 people before I even joined. And because of my non-Chinese identity, I wasn't able to touch on any of the projects. And that was like, that was when I realized, okay, well, I've added enough value, and I've learned enough, and I think there's no next step for me. So obviously, I end up doing something else.
Yeah. So there's actually, yeah. So you had a lot of options then, right? You worked at a famous fund, one of the top in the world for blockchain, right, and crypto. Yeah. And you could have easily gone to another place because the market was great, right?
A lot of people asked me to do. A lot of people asked me to do ICOs.
Yeah, what did you decide to start your own company? That's a big like, it'd be much easier probably to just do ICOs at that time versus start up
for sure.
Right? But you took the path less traveled, the much tougher one. Right.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through that decision? Because it must have been a pretty big decision because you had a lot of options at that time, right?
Yep. So this goes back to my early days, and my kind of like my passion for volunteering and just helping people in general. When I was had a VC role, right? I really enjoy working with startups. And I really enjoy working with entrepreneurs and seeing that impact being made. I did a lot of advisory, even when I was at, Playton, during the kind of rise of ICO. And I really enjoy seeing that. I mean, you could really see the difference back in the days, companies raising hundreds of million in a span of 1 or 2 weeks. And that was quite meaningful to me. Obviously, that money didn't go to me, but the phase, like the kind of like 0 to 1, was very, very transparent. And so I really enjoyed doing that. And so that's why I decided to go back to VC, even though it was a tougher path. But after that, actually running Sora Ventures, everything was actually downward sloping after I started Sora Ventures. And the reason for that was because, I wanted to do something new, something that was different. And I took in back in the days when you invest in ICO, you use ETH to invest in ICOs. And so ETH was like the main currency, meaning of exchange for investing in ICO. So I wanted to build the micro strategy of ETH. And so our fund was all in ETH, holding ETH, no USD, no stablecoin, all in ETH, or digital assets of ETH. So, back then there was like Ethereum in China, the Ethereum, and all the other, narratives around being the future of ETH. We had a lot of that token. So basically it was a digital asset fund. And literally after we finished fundraising, the market crashed. So this is actually quite interesting because the industry that we see today, there's actually elements of that being kind of reflected, which is DAOs. I'm not sure if anyone here is involved with DAOs, but we're in one of the DAOs called Beaker DAO, which is under a category of decentralized science. And the way that a lot of DAOs operate today is you invest using ETH, and then a lot of their funds are in ETH. And so the question I always ask them is like, hey, what happens if ETH crashes like to like $50? Like anything's possible in crypto, right? And then people just like, oh, we don't think that's gonna happen. But a lot of people haven't been to kind of like the scenario that I went to, which was we got in our investors in ETH at 1,250 USD, and at one point ETH was as low as 83 USD.
So 1,200 down to 83. That's like 6% of what it was, or 6 or 7%. That's dismal, man. That went down like 93%. And then I'm like, I bet LPs were like trying to claw their money back or say something. Well, like what I mean, I know most of it is probably like not suitable to say in public, but can you give us a high level of sort of what happened, what you can reveal? That
Yeah,
must have been
yeah,
very, very tough. After you
yeah.
raised money.
So we were very stubborn. Like I was very stubborn that like holding ETH was the way to go. And I think obviously if I held it to now, then that would have been amazing. But ETH was basically going down for a couple of reasons. One is there was the 365 days of fundraising from EOS. Like they were dumping all the ETH, right? And so they were dumping it, shorting it, letting it out so people could short it even more. And that had a negative impact on the price of ETH. The second thing that showed up that made it very different was back in the days, the utility of ETH was to use as a kind of like the environment for the main currency for investing in ICO. In kind of like in early say Q1 of 2018, the YC came out with something called a SAFE, which is a simple agreement for future equity. People took that and then they made it into a simple agreement for future tokens, and everything under that arrangement was in US dollar. And so immediately people didn't want ETH anymore because one ETH was going down, and two, people prefer USD, and so everything changed. And then after the ban in ICO, it was even more obvious that it didn't make sense to use ETH as the main currency to invest. And so that changed really fast. And but even that, I was again, I think I knew a bit too much than the average individual on blockchain. I was basically brainwashed to believe that blockchain and ETH was going to be the dominant thing in the next couple of years. But because the turnover for our fund, our lockup for a fund that back then was 1 year, which means that after 1 year, investors can get out. And then basically after lockup was done, our fund was basically down at one point, down as low as 80%. And it's really tough because we're not well, first of all, we're not the only fund that was down 80% at one point. A lot of the other funds were all down. So to give you some comparison of how crazy this was, when I first started Sora Ventures, there was thousands of quote unquote Web3 funds or blockchain funds. By the end of 2018, I think there was only a handful. There's only a handful. I could count the names using my hands. So like there's only a handful of funds that were still actively investing in Asia, and we were one of them, still barely alive. The only reason we made it alive is because a lot of the investment that we invested actually made money. So the returns on ETH were tremendous, but because the ETH price kept falling down, our USD value was going down, and investors were very upset that the investment they made was going down in the US dollar amount. And then at one point, it became very obvious that investors didn't have the patience, or at least they didn't see Web3 as kind of the future, and people just straight up said, Web3 is a scam, and you're a scammer for getting me involved. And so I had to go through that phase where, the fund is down 80%. What do I do? Do I either, just call it quits or leave, or do you have a decision which is like buying them out in at par? And it's very tough because when we sign documents, like I think people have the expectation that the fund would do really well on the USD value, and obviously we didn't sign any form of agreement that said, hey, if you lose money, then we're going to pay you back at par. But investors weren't willing to leave the fund at a loss, and this is quite common in Asia. Like Asian investors in general, they're it's kind of like the Wild West, because I think the regulation in general is just very early, right, compared to the US. So US are much more seasoned. Investors there are much more seasoned, and they're okay to take a loss. But Asians in general, they're not willing to do that. And this is why kind of like even today, a lot of people don't think Asian investors are legit relative to US investors. But that was definitely reflected, and when I was there, I was running Sora Ventures. So going back, I had the decision to make, right? And so ultimately I decided to buy my investors out at par, which means that if they lost, if they invested $100 in me, they lost $80, the fund would give them $20, and I would personally give them $80. So they're willing to leave the fund, and they go their own ways. But then the condition was I would have 2 years to achieve this, which means that because from a fund perspective, if everyone wanted to exit at the same spot, the fund would be so wrecked. There's like literally no point of returning. And so by buying time, I'm actually there's some hope in terms of my belief that the market will come back, and this is basically what happened. It was a big loss for me personally on my personal net worth, but it was the right decision in the sense that if I didn't do that, then I'll still be stuck with a lot of investors who are just here for a quick buck. And we're not, like I said, we're not the only people that experience that. Some of the best investors that we work with in 2018 also went through a lot of ups and downs. And so, there's, like I said, I mean, this happened for us. It happened for a lot of the funds in Asia, but it also happened for some of our portfolio companies in the US, where these investors were amazing. They had amazing investors. They had these entrepreneurs went to really good schools, Ivy League, and they had an amazing track record, as product developer. But when ETH was down, like everything was down, like all the tokens were down, and they even had investors and syndicates came up to them and called them scammers, and went on social media to call them out, and they were forced to basically make a decision either to sell it, help them sell it at a discount, which at the time, like mostly that's what happened. Like people were willing to take a small loss in order to exit, and at the end we actually end up buying all of that token, and we became the second largest investor. And then they made a pivot, and then so the project is Origin Protocol. I mean, they went through a lot, but I just want to share this because I think a lot of people don't understand that when we tell them that persistence is very important, it is, because I personally went through that myself, and I've had obviously the choice of not doing anything, and it's the same thing as not being responsible, with similar to FTX and the Three Arrow guys, or anyone who were involved with the crash last bear market. But it was one of those decisions that sometimes I think about it, like, wow, it's like I feel like that was actually the right decision, right? And I felt good about it later on. But at the end of the day, what I'm trying to show here is that even people like investors, we have issues too, because everyone has investors. At the end of the day, it's like we're in the same shoe, and so I've seen myself come back. Like our fund is up a lot now, but it was a lot of persistence. It was a lot of being patient. It was a lot of stress, but at the end of the day, it made me stronger. It made me a better person. It made the fund a lot stronger in terms of the credit, our credibility, and because we had a monthly statement with our fund administrator, a lot of things were quite transparent, and people were able to kind of look back and see the numbers ourselves. Whereas a lot of funds at that time didn't have a fund administrator, and so they could just make up numbers, and that caused a lot of kind of trust issue between the LPs and the GPs.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those insights about your ups and downs. I mean, I would even like to say it's not just determination, but you showed a high degree of adaptability and flexibility, right? Like the determination is like staying the course and not giving up, right? But on that journey, we're forced with a lot of tough decisions that require a great deal of flexibility and then readapting to a new situation. Like, you lost like a bunch of your LPs, but you adapted, right? That was definitely not part of the plan. That was not part of the plan.
Yeah.
Right. And then
Yeah.
you also mentioned the example with Matt from Origin Protocol, right? They incredibly determined, but they also show a lot of flexibility, right? And adaptability to capture the market. So thanks for sharing those insights. Yeah, I mean, so down like what, like -80, -90, if you're talking about the ETH, and now up by several multiples, right? So I'd say you guys did pretty well compared to most of the funds out there during this time. I think a lot of people were not so lucky. They're still like left like sort of holding like a depreciated asset, right? And they're hoping to come back. So you guys are in a very unique position right now. And right, you lived through the Ethereum DeFi, you lived through the ICO craze and the NFT boom, and you guys prospered from it. And these market forces that, how long did all these things, like from the Ethereum DeFi to the NFT boom, like was this 5 years or 6 years between these?
No, that was more like 2 years. It was DeFi summer, and then after that, it was the boom of NFTs.
Oh, okay. When did like Aave come out or Compound?
Those were all during DeFi summer. Yeah.
So let's just 2017, right, was when Aave was created, and then when was the NFT boom? I feel like maybe we don't have like the same. Maybe we're not talking the same thing, because when I say the NFT boom, I'm talking about the end of 2021, beginning of 2022.
Yeah, so we started investing in NFT in 2018.
Right.
I even at that time, investors were like, "Oh, you should not invest in NFTs," because actually after ICO, there was a narrative around STOs, security token offering. But I knew enough about blockchain, and I knew enough about the technology that was actually a step backwards, not a step forward. And I bought into the narrative around NFTs. We're probably one of the earliest funds in Asia to invest a lot in NFTs. I mean, some of you guys probably still don't know, but there are like a lot of use cases around NFTs back in the days when it wasn't obvious to us like gaming or art was going to be a thing. But I knew enough in the industry that I knew that it was going to be around entertainment and social media. That's going to be like the first low hanging fruit in terms of use case and adoption, which I was completely right. I mean, we let the first, we let the deal called Mithra, which was started by Amachi, which obviously he's very famous now for owning one of the top 10 ape holders and being very influential on Twitter space. But his background is he came from entertainment business, and when we decided to work together, we wanted to build social media, and that deal actually did really well for us. It did, in general, I think, a lot of the experience that that I had at Playton and Fubushi, all kind of like made a very very strong narrative for us to decide on what to invest in, what not to invest. So generally, we've done very good with that. But DeFi summer was important, but at the same time, I think it was really the NFTs that got us.
DeFi summer was it 2019? What was that?
No, I want to say it was 2020, maybe.
2020.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm trying to map this back to like when you started Sora Ventures, which is what was it, 2017, 2018? What?
2000 and why? you basically have to spend some time starting a fund, right? All the PPM and all the documents. So, I officially started Sora Venture in 2018. That's when we started, January 2018. That's when we started investing.
Okay.
But a lot of the work was put in as early as Q3 of 2017.
Okay. Perfect. So yeah, so this is even better because I was under impression that the first DeFi on Ethereum was like 2017 plus or minus, and then I'm just projecting it out to when NFTs became like sort of like a global
Yeah.
phenomenon.
So DeFi summer was 2020, and then NFT hype was mid 2021.
Yeah, well, yeah, okay. So from an outsider's perspective, the NFT hype, like most people knew about it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Knew about it.
well, no, I mean, like for people inside, is like probably like at that
So
time,
for
but
Ape, all those guys.
to the rest of the world,
Yep.
it was like 2022 January,
Yeah.
the end of 2021. But okay, so yeah, okay, so that changed my perception of things. Because if it only took 2 years for the DeFi, well, I mean, it was growing, right? It accumulated to a DeFi summer, and then after that, the NFT boom, right? So what I'm, because look, you're one of the first investors to invest a lot from Ethereum into Bitcoin, right? And so I was you must have seen something, right? Like one is why did you invest so heavily in H1 2023 when most investors either didn't have money, right, or they're afraid to invest? What did you see?
Yeah, I think a lot of investors probably had less money and just want to play conservative because Bitcoin at the time is Bitcoin even today is early, but because I think we went we went through we learned a lot of lessons from kind of the 2018 2019 bear market. So we actually avoided a lot of the crash, FTX, Luna, just in general, 2 years ago, and we were smart enough to exit the deals that people were hyped about. So when people were buying, like investing, a lot of money in kind of like the mid 2021 to early 2022, we decided to exit because at the end of the day, it's like what we realized is we held things for too long, and at the end of the day, there's always going to be an exit point for investors. And when I was at Fimbushi, I was really good at buying and investing, but I was not very good at selling. And part of the VC business is that when you build a really strong connection, it's with an entrepreneur. It's basically like your baby to some extent, right? It's like your child, and to just let your child go is always tough. But I've later learned that it's also important to let the child kind of go, so the child will become a man, or a adult, right? And so the thing that we did that was right was the risk management of exiting during the peak, and then not doing anything when the market dropped, and now so we obviously have money to invest. I'm much more comfortable than a lot of the funds. And the other thing is I think a lot of people don't have the same experience that I did, whereas a lot of people in Asia are still investing, the narrative around gaming, GameFi, but for me, it's like the gaming GameFi was more of a 2017, 2018 bet as opposed to today. When we look at things, when I look at things, I like to look at things 2, 3, 4 years down the road. So yes, gaming will probably continue to have its position in the industry, but it's not going to be anywhere as high of an upside as Bitcoin, because the logic of our investing in Bitcoin is that from kind of like my early days at Fimbushi to Sora Ventures, everything that we invested in revolved around kind of the next Ethereum, or people are trying to benchmark Ethereum, and this is like the first time where and a lot of people don't know this, but when I even look at even like Aptos and Sui, people think like, oh, it's gonna probably shoot for the moon and it's gonna do really, really well. But I also had that kind of like thought process back in 2017 where I thought all the major altcoins that did a lot of fundraising were going to survive. And ultimately what I've learned is that they did not survive. And a lot of them didn't do so well today. I mean, and so there's always going to be risks in looking at these, even for like Solana, Avalanche, like Aptos, like these guys are never tested in the bear market. And so only tokens that have been tested in the bear market will come up strong, right? So what I've learned is that that's always been the narrative. If this token ever going to survive, but Bitcoin, you don't have to worry about that because Bitcoin is above Ethereum, right? And so it makes so much sense that when you think of Bitcoin as a platform for building, in the past there wasn't any utility, but now we're seeing a lot more utility on top of it, and a lot of people, investors, have been kind of like betting on Bitcoin will be 100K or 200K, but realistically a lot of them can't even make that justification on why, right? But I can say that the reason for why it's going to be a big part of utility of Bitcoin, and we've seen that's always been the case for every chain that people invest, which is they launch a chain, and then when there's strong utility on there, the token price goes up. That's always true. That's always the case, right? So it's going to be this case. It's always going to be. Bitcoins also have that benefit when more utility is being built on Bitcoin, beyond what was initially described from the white paper. You're going to see the price of Bitcoin go up. That's the first logic. The second logic is miners. Historically, you look at Solana, they have a Solana Foundation that invests in projects and their ecosystem. Avalanche is Blizzard that invests in the Avalanche ecosystem. But Bitcoin doesn't have like a Bitcoin Foundation that invests in the Bitcoin ecosystem. But who actually has who makes a lot of sense in investing in Bitcoin is the miners, because miners actually gain one of the most benefit directly from the Bitcoin utility. When utility of Bitcoin goes up, then the fee goes up, and so miners actually make money from that. And so I think there's even a strong narrative to say that in the future it's going to be the miners who are potentially coming out with VC funds to invest in the Bitcoin ecosystem, because miners need to keep themselves in business, right? And a lot of articles recently have been making the argument that miners will struggle and they'll close down during the next halving. But the way I look at it is, if utility goes up and more investments are coming in, then they're actually going to be making more and more fees, maybe at multiples, right? And so when they see that, they're obviously going to invest more money into Bitcoin ecosystem. But we're just going to be the first investors who make that first kind of initial push. But afterwards, we do feel that miners will come and be a dominant investor in the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Okay, very interesting. So there's a lot of questions I want to unpack there. One, right now Bitcoin has what, a few hundred dApps, low hundreds. Okay, it's worth what, $29,000 today. Okay, so when Ethereum had a few hundred, like low hundred dApps, how much was Ethereum price?
When maybe like
when
30 bucks, 30, 30,
bucks.
30,
Okay,
40 bucks.
so
80 bucks. So around 80 bucks, right?
Okay, let's just say it's $80, right? 80 to today is what, roughly is 1800. So that's what, I don't know, like 20, let's just say like 25 times, right?
Yeah.
To 10,000 dApps. So if Bitcoin gets to thousands or 10,000 dApps and it multiplies by 25 times, then we're talking about tens of trillions of market cap. Right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of people say like the best time for Bitcoin is over, but we're talking about 20x, which is
No, I don't think that's yeah. So the way I look at it is, Bitcoin is going to be the biggest database in the world. So you look at some of the big data companies, right? They're some of them are obviously worth a lot, but if you put all the data companies together, then obviously you're going to be your value is going to be much higher. The way I look at Bitcoin is that Bitcoin is a single basically if you have to like put it in the stocks terms, then it's basically a single company that also provides the data layer, and they'll have by far the biggest in the world compared to all the other centralized companies like Tencent or like Google, or like AWS. These guys.
That sounds to me, that sounds like really low, because those companies are only like, some of those are not even $1 trillion.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, I guess it's good to be conservative on it. Now, the other question I had, right, was you said DeFi summer and NFT boom was just 2 years apart, right? If it took 2 years for those two factors to work together, how do you think it's going to take longer on Bitcoin, or is it
so
short?
so I think well, I mean, this is not financial advice, but the way that we interpret this is that once after the halving, I think miners will start to see that, oh, there's like obviously a change in that, in their business model, but the utility, they're probably going to notice that the more utility that comes into the market from Bitcoin, the more profitable they're going to be. And so that's kind of like one speculation that we're doing there. And so I think most likely in a year and a half, or even 2 years, but I'll most likely bet on after the halving. But as investors, we don't want to invest after the halving when everything is hot. We want to invest before things are hot. So I mean, this is why we've done it very, very early.
Yes, and thanks for investing, right, in the ecosystem. You're our lead investor, and you invested in. Can you share with the crowd some of the companies you invested in, or is that still private?
Yeah. So we're investing obviously in you guys, on Chain Monkey, Gamma, X First, Bitcoin Magazine. Bitcoin Magazine's biggest fund, their first ecosystem fund. We're the lead investors there as well.
You're the lead LP for that, like, or the largest
lead LP, yeah. So we put in $3 million. So LP of that. And so the way I look at it is that because Bitcoin Startup Lab and the Bitcoin Magazine guys, they have their own funds, and these two funds will probably be investing. They're doing 100% in Bitcoin, right? And so in a way, directly, we're having exposure to a lot more companies as well. Being the lead investors, and then of course from our perspective, we're still looking to lead one or two more deals in Bitcoin that we're currently working on, but we can't share that right now because it's still like,
of course, we'll keep those
but
until it's ready.
Yeah. But in terms of USD amount, I think we'll probably hit somewhere around 7 to 8 million USD by this quarter.
Okay, so this is something. Okay, no, that's 7 to 8. So again, leading the pack in the Bitcoin space. Excellent. So because you're also diversified, if I understand correctly, you're also LP in some Ethereum funds. Can you share that a little bit, just real quick?
Yeah, so we're also LPs of Bankless, and we see there's a lot of value working with Bankless because they have a very strong Ethereum community, and I think there's going to be a lot of correlation there, right? In terms of working with with Bitcoin, we're going to see a lot more developers coming from elsewhere into Bitcoin. Historically, it's been Stacks and Rootstock, but I definitely do feel that we're already seeing that actually. Like, there's a lot of people who are just in stealth mode right now, building on Bitcoin. And they're in stealth because they're early, right? And so we just want to be sure that when that happens, like, really have position in a lot of the deals. And so this is why we're working so hard on not only just building a stronger infrastructure around the Bitcoin ecosystem, but a stronger voice on kind of like who's doing what and who has the value and who's actually putting money. And that's important. And that's important in a sense that if founders are looking for money, they can reach out to us, and they'll be like, oh, it makes a lot of sense to get Sora involved, because if Sora is involved, then very likely that other funds can partner together and invest in the same direction.
Yeah, I mean, after you invested, we got a few other brand name investors, so that's definitely the case. I could vouch for that.
Yeah.
Thank you again. Now, let me go back to this thing about like follow where the money or where the users are going, right? And smart investors follow the founders and the users, so, or smart investors do that. So you're definitely like leading the pack there. Now, putting Bankless aside because this is their first fund, but there are other funds in the Ethereum space that have not done that as well as you guys, but yet they're still like sort of like just checking out the Ethereum space, right? How come they don't come to Bitcoin? Like, what's your advice to them? What's your advice to them about that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of reasons. Funds today have investors who are used to investment mandate. So there's a lot of funds that are looking to bet on, their initial narrative to make their portfolio company stronger. So, for example, if I have 50 portfolio companies all in the gaming sector, it makes a lot of sense for me to keep investing in more entrepreneurs so that there's more resources to be built around the gaming sector, like GameFi, for example. And so, as what one is to make sure that there's more companies involved and they can all collaborate together and their success is higher. And two is from their perspective, they'll most likely have some form of investment thesis. So if they started a couple of years ago, probably Bitcoin would not be one of their investment thesis. So like I said, they have to report to investors, and investors could, it wouldn't be professional to go straight from GameFi straight into Bitcoin, right? And so there needs to be a lot more adjustment and time from an operational, from a management perspective, for funds to shift from one sector to another sector. But we're already seeing that, and that's a great sign. So I think over time, more people will get involved and invest in Bitcoin. It's just, we don't mind being the first guys. In fact, we're pretty happy being the first guys, because that means, we get first dip. Generally, again, I mean, funds in general, they're more like followers rather than leaders. And so, most people are still following the crowd and waiting for like the first, for example, the first BRC20 company to get listed on Binance or OKX and all these top exchanges. So, we're just part of that role where we're helping facilitating and making that happen. And so once that happens, people will get more excited about the Bitcoin space.
Super, that's excellent. So we're coming up on time right now. So let's bring this full circle. In high school, you were doing a lot of volunteer work. It's like being a giver and being charitable. And now that your first fund had several multiples ROI, now you're in a position to give, right? And part of that, I can see that you guys are sort of becoming like a fund of funds that become the LPs of other funds like Bankless or Bitcoin Magazine's 2140 Bitcoin Ecosystem Fund. But also, you guys are the biggest single Bitcoin agnostic prize sponsor of the year at $50,000, right? And that led the pack because we also have other sponsors now coming in at $25,000 to $50,000. But of course, like this is like, you have to use their technology, right? So you're the title sponsor. What did you want? And traditionally, normally like prizes in hackathons for Bitcoin, I was just checking the numbers, and the hackathons that went to this year, they're usually like 8,000, 10,000 is already a lot for like the title prize, right? This is already a lot. So this is magnitudes more, which sort of puts us into like the category of Ethereum. Right now, I think we have over 150,000 prizes confirmed, which I think is also very competitive if we're talking about even Ethereum or Solana space, right? But what was your motivation to to put up such a big sponsor when maybe other people were hesitant to do this?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest value here is you want to reward developers and entrepreneurs who are visionary, right? I mean, the investment world is very practical in the sense that you come in early, you always have more upside, and so we just want to make sure that there's a bit of incentive involved for early developers who receive Bitcoin, to kind of join our the kind of the next big wave, right, in Web3. And so this might be, like you said, might be the biggest thus far in the Bitcoin ecosystem space. But I guarantee you that this number will grow in the next couple of years significantly. It's just that we're just one fund, and I can tell you that there's going to be a lot more funds joining in the next years. And like I said, right, I think we're obviously very humble and grateful, to be part of this journey with you guys. But the truth is, I do think that there's always reward for being early, and you get a lot of credibility as an entrepreneur as well. You investing your time into the Bitcoin ecosystem early, right, and at the same time, getting the resources involved into the Bitcoin system, so Bitcoin ecosystem. That's just our logic, which is if people are visionaries and they see the future the same way that we do, but they wear a different hat, right? They're not the investor hat; they're wearing the entrepreneurship or developer hat or the hacker hat. Then they should also get reward, and that's why we're putting up 50K when historically it's been less than 10K.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You're in a unique position. A lot of investors are just investors, but you're the entrepreneur first, and you're the hacker, you're the developer. So I feel that you have a certain level of empathy for these entrepreneurs, because you've been through the gauntlet yourself. So I mean, $50,000 is a game changer, right? If you know how to use $50,000, that could take you from idea stage to your first round of a few $100,000 investment, or maybe even more, right? So it's not like in the big like maybe if like American or Canadian, like $50,000, that's average 1 year salary. But if to a savvy entrepreneur anywhere in the world, including the US, $50,000 could definitely get you over the hump. So that's a big contribution. Also, thanks for leading that pack. You're going to make this. It's already going to be the biggest hackathon on Bitcoin of the year. By the way, just to the audience who are hearing about this prize, by the way, all the prizes right now, it's based on this is a collaborative effort, right? So we're doing it as a nonprofit. None of us are, the platform is not taking any money for marketing fees, no money for operation fees. And so so Jason and other prize sponsors, these prizes 100% go to helping the entrepreneurs and builders and developers. Okay, so this is something that we're doing. It's a community effort. Bitcoin Startup Lab is leading the charge. Jason at Sora Funds, they led the charge with the biggest prize sponsor of the year. But we also need the contestants to do the contribution. So we're going to do something pretty creative this time. So although there are 6 figures in funds and prizes now, here's the thing, guys. You have to, every 200 active participants, we're going to unlock 20% of the prize pool. So let's say there's 150,000 in prizes. When there's 200 active participants, 30,000 gets unlocked until we reach 1,000 active participants, and 100% of the prize pools can be earned. Right. So this is also a call to action for those of you who are contestants. Tomorrow is a sign up day, first day to sign up tomorrow, and you guys can go to our Discord, and then there's a canned tweet that you have to reshare and invite more friends to come to the hackathon, right? Because every 200 contestants unlocks 20% of the prize money. Right? Going on a tangent there, doing a little plug for our hackathon, Jason. Right, so let's bring this back. Okay, this is great, Jason. Let's wrap up. What are some like bring this back to your experiences having been both an entrepreneur and a fund entrepreneur for a non-fund and then now entrepreneur for a fund, right? So you sort of worn both hats and seen both sides of the equation. What are some of the advice you could give to people wanting to come to Bitcoin or build their startups today?
Yeah, I think, I mean, for me, it's very obvious, like no brainer that Bitcoin will be, a big game changer in the next wave. But I think for a lot of people, I think they didn't understand that, um, I mean, whatever you see today in the Bitcoin ecosystem, it's only a beginning of, the use cases. There's in the past, I think a lot of people, a lot of protocols have taken the same path of Ethereum, the safe path. Now, there's a saying that every road kind of leads to Rome, where every that path in the past, even for Solana and Avalanche and those guys, they carry the EVM card with them, right? And they basically just walk the same path as Ethereum. Wherever Ethereum goes, they go. They're kind of the guys in the back. Bitcoin will have the same result, or if not more powerful than Ethereum, and in its own ways. But it's going to be 100% a different path. It's going to be a new path to Rome, and so just understand that things will not be the same, and sometimes change may not be this. It's the language you guys are working on, and a lot of the framework around it will be different. But at the end of the day, it's this that's going to make you much more valuable than other chains. And it's a lot safer, obviously, to build on Bitcoin than other coins, because, like I said, the other tokens, a lot of them that are new today, even Aptos and Sui, they've never been tested by the bear market before. But Bitcoin has been around, obviously, for a long time, and I mean, if Bitcoin goes to zero, then the entire Web3 industry goes to zero. So that's never going to happen. But what is possible is that my experience is that even these altcoins, can drop 90%, 99%. I've seen that, right? And so this is why we're very careful when investing into the ecosystem of altcoin. But I'm never shy about investing in the ecosystem of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is by far the safest.
That is correct, and it still has got over 10x return there. Because today we had some technical difficulties with Twitter Spaces, but I know that if the Twitter Space is running right now, people in the audience would be very interested in what you want to invest in. So maybe we do some broad stroke. What are some of the more exciting categories that you want to see come to life on Bitcoin?
Yeah. So Bitcoin right now is super early, right? It's super early in the sense that we still haven't seen the kind of the first big use case around BRC20. We've seen that in ordinals already, but I think things could be done better. But BRC20 is one that I think a lot of people are extremely and like very, very much looking forward to seeing, especially in Asia. Like a lot of like we invest in a couple communities in Asia, and they manage like all these groups, and we read through them a lot, and people are super excited about BRC20. Like every day, their conversation is all about BRC20.
Yes.
And so, yeah, and so in the short term, obviously, is to see kind of the big success in the first project and the biggest success in BRC20. So my way of seeing success is like it be RC20 token getting listed on the top exchanges, where everyone can have the channel to buy, expose themselves to the Bitcoin ecosystem. But in the future is there's all this utility that's currently built on Ethereum, and that could be mimicked to Bitcoin. Like I said, the road, the path will be different, the stacks will be different, the way to build it will be different. But if you've done coding before, you should know very well that in every coder that codes something, they can code exactly the same thing and it looks exactly the same on the outside. But because they're different coder, the codes are always going to be different. Right? That's why it's so hard to, if a CTO leaves, it's really hard to to have someone else build on top of the existing code base, even with amazing documentations. That's one of the challenges even for today, right? the documentation are more important than code base itself, because with the right documentation, you can rebuild everything if you want to. Obviously with a different person, but going back to what I'm saying is like this is very similar to what we're probably going to see in Bitcoin as well. Which on the outside you'll have a lot of utility that's similar to Ethereum, but on the inside it's going to be a different stack. So, and that's totally fine. It's just we're working towards that path where we're providing more tools, providing more options for developers to build on top of Bitcoin.
Super. Thanks for that. Thanks for sharing a little glimpse into what you wanted to invest in, and perhaps maybe a little glimpse into the future there. And speaking about BRC20s, we for this our Who's Who, a founder's journey to Bitcoin, we also have Delmo, the creator of BRC20, coming up. And I think now is a good time to share with the audience the next 4 founders' journey into Bitcoin, so you guys know what's going on and have something to look forward to before we close out here. So Danny Yang, CEO of OCM, also one of the companies you invested in before, right, Jason? Is going to be coming on for his founder's journey interview tomorrow, sharing his origin story. Then Erin Redwing, she's the CEO, president of the new Open Ordinals Institute, right? Working with the creators of the Ordinals protocol. And then that's the day after tomorrow. And then Robin, who is the CEO of Liquidium, the first Ordinals lending protocol on Bitcoin L1 or native Bitcoin, is going to come up. And then Trevor Owens, who's he's a serial entrepreneur, also a fund manager, but he's the first person to create an Ordinals podcast with the most people attending. So he's made some very significant cultural contributions. So with that said, we have about 15, now 16 Who's Who. And we want the audience to share with us if you guys have nominations for somebody who has done something for the first time ever on Bitcoin, or set a new record. For, in this case today, Jason, they set a new record, right? They became the top investor or by money deployed in 2023 H1. So either first time ever or you set a new record on Bitcoin. Give us their name, right? Introduce us to them. We will. And if they qualify, we're going to interview them, and they're going to share their origin story to inspire more people to want to build on Bitcoin, right? So again, this show is brought to you by Startup Lab. We're a top pre-accelerator on top of Bitcoin. And also we have media partners, Crypto Slate, which is the media partner that's bringing all this news to the rest of the crypto world. And of course, BTC Inc., the mother company of Bitcoin Magazine and Bitcoin Ecosystem Fund. Then they're the biggest media on Bitcoin right now. So stay tuned for the next episodes. And again, we're doing this to help accelerate the advent of the Bitcoin economy, right? And then for those of you who want to sign up for the hackathon or keep posted, go to our Twitter link, or I guess it's called X now, right? X at BTC Startup Lab. X at BTC Startup Lab. Thank you guys, and thank you, Jason, for joining us. I know it's very late. It's midnight there in Taiwan, right? So thanks again for joining.
Yeah.